The moment the power cut out, I was standing at the grill, flipping bourbon-glazed ribs for a crowd that included the mayor, 3 members of city council, and my old college roommate, who just so happened to be the county's assistant DA. The string lights blinked once and died, the fridge gave a mechanical sigh, and the entire backyard fell into confused silence. Then came the sound of someone dropping a plate. "That's not supposed to happen," Mayor Tillman muttered, glancing up from his paper plate piled high with slaw and brisket. I wiped my hands on a towel and muttered something about the breaker. I knew better. I'd had the electrical redone last winter, overkill for a cabin this size, but I liked having backup generators and surge protection. Thing was, none of it was kicking in. "Franklin, what's going on?" asked Zara Ellings, councilwoman and the sharpest legal mind in 3 counties. She was already setting her plate down, eyes narrowed. "Give me 30 seconds, I said, already jogging toward the side gate. The cabin sat just inside a sprawling forest neighborhood with big lots and plenty of space between houses. I'd lived here 6 years, kept to my own, paid my dues to the HOA barely, and I knew exactly who was behind this: Zelda and Wright, the HOA president from hell. She was the type of woman who measured grass with a ruler, reported cars parked an inch over the curb, and once sent a written warning because my garbage bins were visible for 10 minutes past pickup. I'd ignored most of her noise. But apparently, throwing a cookout with music and more than 10 cars parked legally on my gravel driveway had set her off like a firecracker. As I rounded the corner, I saw her. Standing next to the main electrical box by the road, smug in her pastel cardigan and oversized sun hat, clutching a clipboard like it was a sword. Her husband, Roy, was sweating bullets next to her, holding a giant pair of bolt cutters and looking like he wanted to disappear. "Zelda," I said, voice low but steady as I walked up to the box. "Did you just cut my power?" She turned, feigning surprise. "Franklin, this is a violation of Section 14.3 of the HOA Charter. No disruptive gatherings, no amplified sound, no more than 6 vehicles beyond the resident's own." "You cut the power," I said again. "That's a felony. Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "It's a controlled shutoff." Roy just clipped the exterior line. "It's reversible. You disabled power to a home without cause. That line is private property. It's for the safety of the neighborhood. The volume of your party and the traffic people were parking on the easement. They were on my driveway. And I received no less than 5 complaints," she huffed, flipping a page on her clipboard. "One from a neighbor who reported open flames and suspected alcohol consumption." "It's a barbecue," I said, incredulous. "We're grilling ribs and sipping beer. You cut power to a house with senior city officials in it. The mayor is here." Zelda blinked. I could see the gears turning, but she didn't back down. "Then maybe the mayor should familiarize himself with the HOA's bylaws." "Zelda," came a voice from behind me. Zara Ellings had walked up without a sound, arms crossed. "You're not authorized to tamper with electrical infrastructure." "That's a criminal act," Zelda's mouth puckered. "I'm the HOA president. I have the right to enforce our codes." "Wrong," Zara said sharply. "You have the right to issue citations. You don't have the right to damage private electrical lines. That's utility tampering." "That's a class of misdemeanor, possibly more depending on local interpretation." Zelda's face flushed red. "Well, he was creating a disturbance." The mayor strolled up, brushing rib sauce from his chin. "You just cut power to a house full of government officials, ma'am." "That's not going to go the way you think." Roy finally spoke. "Zelda, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Roy," she snapped. I looked at the box. Roy had literally snipped the line. Industrial cutters lay at his feet, still warm. No lockout tag, no notice, just brute force. "You're going to pay for every appliance surge this caused," I said, "and I'm filing a report." "Oh, please," Zelda snorted. "You think the sheriff's department cares about a little neighborhood dispute?" "No," I said, "but the city attorney might. Especially when half of them are sitting in my backyard eating ribs in the dark." She hesitated. Zara leaned a little closer. "And you just admitted to it in front of witnesses." Zelda's hand trembled as she tried to steady her clipboard. "This was an emergency action." "I have authority." "You're about to have a lawsuit," I said. "Multiple, Zara added. Roy looked like he was about to faint. I turned to walk back toward the cabin. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Zelda. I suggest you call an electrician before the county inspector gets here. Zelda opened her mouth to reply, but no words came out. Back at the cabin, the guests were chatting calmly despite the blackout. Zara was already dialing someone. Mayor Tillman clapped me on the back. Well, he said. This is going to be an interesting Monday. I nodded. Yeah, and I think the HOA just made their last mistake. By dawn, I had a county electrician on site, scratching his head at the open junction box and the clean cut through my underground service cable. Never seen anything like this, he muttered, crouched low with his headlamp shining into the mess Roy had made. Somebody used bolt cutters and a lot of nerve. I leaned against the porch rail, sipping bitter coffee. They didn't just kill my power, they disabled my generator switch too. That's intentional sabotage, he stood up slowly. That's not just HOA overreach, that's criminal interference with utility infrastructure. I'll file the report, but you're going to want to call the sheriff's office. This isn't a citation, it's a felony. I didn't answer, I was already dialing. Detective Miles showed up within the hour. Former Marine, now with the county's Property Crimes Division. When I explained what happened, he didn't blink once. She admitted to it, he asked, flipping through his notepad. In front of 6 witnesses, I said. Including Zara Ellings and Mayor Tillman. He blew out a low whistle. Well, that's going to make this one for the books. Usually HOAs stick to passive-aggressive newsletters and fake fines. He took photos of the cut cable, the tool marks, the lack of any lockout tag or documentation. Then he asked to see my security footage. I walked him into my office, where a bank of monitors lined the wall. I'd installed the system back when a neighbor tried to claim I was illegally storing construction materials behind my shed. The footage was crystal clear. There she was, Zelda and Wright, marching up to the box like she owned the grid, barking orders at Roy while he hesitated. She even waved off a neighbor who walked by, saying, "This is an HOA emergency. Keep moving." Miles watched the whole thing, then leaned back with a low grunt. That's willful destruction of utility infrastructure, and she gave a direct order to damage private property. That'll hold up in court. He asked for a copy of the footage, which I transferred to his drive. Then I printed the HOA charter and highlighted the section she'd cited. It didn't authorize anything close to what she'd done. By the time he left, I could already see the gears turning. This wasn't going away quietly. 2 days later, I got the official notice. Zelda and Wright and Roy were being investigated for criminal mischief, destruction of private property, and unlawful disruption of utility service. Class E felony, potentially upgraded depending on what the DA's office decided, but Zelda didn't go down easy. She called an emergency HOA board meeting the next night at the clubhouse near the pond. I went, against my better instincts, partly because Zara told me she'd be there too. She wasn't about to let this turn into one of Zelda's usual kangaroo courts. The room was packed. Homeowners filled every folding chair, a dozen standing in the back. Zelda sat at the head of the long table, flanked by her usual stooges Martin, the treasurer who once tried to fine a woman for planting non-approved tulips, and Connie, who hadn't lived in the neighborhood for over a year but still voted by proxy. She cleared her throat dramatically. We are here to address a recent situation involving disruptive behavior, public endangerment, and improper gatherings in violation of our community standards. Zara stood before Zelda could go further. No, we're here to discuss how you committed a felony by ordering someone to cut power to a private residence. Zelda's face twitched. That's a gross mischaracterization. I was acting under emergency authority granted to me by Article 19, Section 8. You have no authority to tamper with utilities, Zara said, her voice calm but cutting. That's not an emergency protocol, that's criminal sabotage, Martin tried to interject. Well, the neighborhood was becoming unsafe. Cars were blocking sightlines. Children could have been. There were no children within 50 yards of the driveway, Zara said. And all vehicles were parked within legal bounds. You don't get to invent hazards. Someone in the back piped up. Why didn't you just call the sheriff if you thought there was a problem? Zelda ignored them. The HOA board has full discretion to act in the best interest of the community. A buzz of discontent swept through the room. I stepped forward. You cut power to a house with city officials inside it. You endangered lives. One of the guests was a diabetic who had insulin in my fridge. If she'd gone into shock, you'd be staring down a manslaughter charge. Murmurs turned to gasps. Zelda stood abruptly. This meeting is out of order. I won't stand here and be accused. You won't be standing there for long, said a voice near the door. Detective Miles walked in, followed by 2 county deputies. He approached the table, flipped open his badge, and said, Zelda Enright, Roy Enright, you're under arrest for criminal interference with utility infrastructure, destruction of private property, and reckless endangerment. Zelda's mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Roy slowly raised his hands as if surrendering to the inevitable. The deputies cuffed them both. Zelda tried to protest, but Miles didn't flinch. You can explain it to the judge. The room stayed silent as they were marched out. A few people looked away, others stared openly. No one said a word. Once they were gone, Zara addressed the room. There will be a formal vote to dissolve the current HOA board at the next scheduled meeting. Until then, all enforcement actions are suspended. And if anyone from the board tries to retaliate or issue fake citations, they'll be joining Zelda in a courtroom. People clapped. A few even stood. I didn't smile. I felt relief but not joy. It was like removing a tumor. Necessary but not something to celebrate. Later that night, I went back to the cabin. The electrician had finished the repairs and everything hummed quietly. The generator switch had been replaced, the security system fully restored. Zara stayed behind. She leaned against the porch railing, arms folded, watching the trees sway in the evening wind. You know she's going to try to claim she was protecting the neighborhood, she said. They always do, I replied. Doesn't matter. She crossed a line you can't uncross. She acted like she was untouchable, like the rules didn't apply to her. I nodded. And now she'll find out what real rules look like. We stood there in silence a while longer, the distant chirp of crickets filling the gaps. Eventually, she looked over. You ever think about running for the board? Not once, I said. She grinned. Might be time someone competent stepped up. The neighborhood's not going to fix itself. I didn't answer. But as I looked out at the quiet woods, the lit windows of my cabin, and the people starting to trust each other again, I knew one thing for certain. Zelda's reign was over, and we were just getting started. The next Thursday, I got a formal summons not from the sheriff's office, but from the interim HOA secretary, a quiet woman named Marlene, who had apparently been bullied into silence during Zelda's tenure. Now she was organizing a special election to rebuild the board from scratch. The community center had never been this full. People who hadn't shown up to a meeting in 5 years packed the folding chairs, some standing along the walls. Word had spread fast about Zelda's arrest, and curiosity had turned into something sharper: resolve. A few faces I'd never seen before whispered quietly together, clutching wrinkled copies of the association bylaws like they were legal weapons. Marlene stood at the front, clearly overwhelmed but determined, her voice shaking slightly as she read the agenda. First item is the formal removal of all current board members not under investigation, she said. Second is the appointment of a temporary oversight committee until new elections are held. Someone near the middle stood up, a broad-shouldered man in paint-splattered jeans and a neon shirt with a plumbing logo. So we're just pretending none of this happened. Roy and Zelda cut a power line and the rest of the board sat on their hands. That's not just bad judgment, that's complicity. Marlene looked down at her papers. We're not ignoring it, but we need to follow procedure. Then let's use the emergency clause, said a woman at the back. Section 22, subclause B. If board members are found to have engaged in illegal behavior, they can be removed by a supermajority of present homeowners. We've got the numbers. Let's vote. Heads turned. I recognized her. Lydia, a retired court clerk who'd once been fined for putting a bench in her front yard without approval. She held up a laminated copy of the charter, already tabbed and highlighted. People started nodding. Marlene hesitated, then slowly stepped aside. All right. All in favor of removing the current board under subclause B, raise your hand. Nearly every hand went up. The few that didn't belong to people who looked deeply uncomfortable. The vote wasn't even close. The board was dissolved on the spot. A ripple of relief passed through the room, followed quickly by murmurs of what to do next. I stayed quiet, watching faces. Some looked cautiously hopeful. Others, like Lydia's, looked ready for war. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Zelda's arrest had triggered more than legal consequences. It had opened a vault of past grievances. People began coming forward with stories. Fines that were never documented. Board meetings where votes were faked. A neighbor named Curtis revealed that his architectural request for an extension had been lost 3 times until he agreed to hire a contractor who happened to be Roy's cousin. An elderly couple said they'd been threatened with foreclosure over a cracked driveway that was already scheduled for repair. Zara helped coordinate a formal complaint to the state's Department of Consumer Protection. Over 20 residents signed affidavits. I submitted the security footage, along with a notarized statement detailing the night Zelda ordered the power cut. Then something unexpected happened. One of the contractors who did work for the HOA came forward. His name was Blake, a wiry man with sun-leathered skin and a nervous energy that made him seem perpetually on edge. He showed up at my cabin one morning holding a manila envelope. "I heard you're the guy who had the mayor over when Zelda lost it," he said, eyeing the security camera above my door. "I got something you'll want to see." I invited him in, and he dropped the envelope on my table. Inside were invoices way too many for paint jobs, fence repairs, and landscaping. Many had been billed to the HOA at double or triple the standard rate. I did the work, Blake admitted. But she told me to inflate the numbers, said the board would approve it no matter what, and they did. "Did you get kickbacks?" "No," he said quickly. "But Roy did. I saw him cash a check once from a supplier he told me to use. Same place I was told to buy all materials from." "Way overpriced." I leaned forward. "You willing to testify?" He hesitated. "If I don't, I'm going down with them. I got a wife, kids. I didn't know how deep it went till now." I called Zara immediately. She met us at her office downtown, her paralegal already drafting a witness affidavit. Blake's testimony, combined with the financial records, was the missing piece. Within a week, the DA's office had enough to expand the investigation. Roy was arrested again, this time for financial misconduct and fraud. Zelda's charges were amended to include conspiracy to defraud and racketeering under state law. The HOA, it turned out, had been a front for personal enrichment, unapproved fines, inflated contracts, and threats of lien sales, all used as tools of coercion. The fallout was massive. The county froze the HOA's bank accounts pending a full audit. A court-appointed financial administrator took over. Every fee and fine issued over the past 3 years was put under review. Some homeowners even got refund checks in the mail. Others were told they could join a class action suit being assembled by Zara and a small legal team she brought in from her old firm. I thought things would quiet down after that. They didn't. People started asking me to run for the new board. I refused at first. I didn't want to be part of anything even resembling what Zelda had built, but then Marlene approached me with a binder. "This isn't about power," she said. "It's about protection. We need someone who knows how to spot these games before they start." I agreed on one condition: that the new board would be fully transparent, every meeting recorded, every budget posted publicly, every vote documented and made available within 48 hours. The vote came a week later. I won unanimously. Lydia joined as compliance officer. Blake was hired as a consultant not for construction, but to help untangle the web of past contracts and identify fraud. The first thing we did was hire a forensic accountant. The second thing, we installed community-wide security cameras paid for with the reclaimed funds from the inflated invoices Zelda had approved. The neighborhood changed fast. People started showing up to meetings with ideas instead of complaints. We planted a community garden on a vacant lot that had been fenced off for future development, but never used. Curtis finished his extension, this time without a bribe. The elderly couple who'd been threatened over their driveway sat in the front row at every meeting, smiling quietly as the new team dismantled the old rules one by one. Zelda, meanwhile, was under house arrest pending trial. Her attorney tried to argue she had acted out of concern for the community, but the judge wasn't buying it. With multiple witnesses, documents, and video evidence, her case was looking grim. Zara told me she might take a plea deal. If she did, it would mean probation, restitution, and permanent removal from any HOA authority in the state. If not, she'd likely serve time. Either way, she was done. One night, months after it all began, I sat on my porch with Zara. The cabin was quiet again, the forest humming softly in the background. The new string lights blinked gently above us, the kind that ran on their own backup battery, just in case. She looked over at me. "You realize you built a government without meaning to." "I just wanted to grill ribs in peace," I said. She laughed. "You also exposed fraud, took down a criminal enterprise, and rewrote your HOA's bylaws." "Yeah, but the ribs were good." She raised her glass. "To electric fences and civic duty." I clinked mine against hers. The cabin lights stayed on. The night stayed calm. And for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt like home. 2 weeks after the forensic audit concluded, the final evidence dropped like a sledgehammer. I was in the middle of reviewing a proposed landscape maintenance contract when Zara walked into the community center's makeshift boardroom, a thick folder in hand, and a look on her face that made everyone stop talking immediately. She tossed the folder onto the table without a word. Pages spilled across the polished wood bank statements, emails, scanned checks. Zelda wasn't just misappropriating funds, she said, pulling up a chair. She was laundering money through a fake neighborhood improvement fund. Martin, the old treasurer who'd quietly resigned after the last meeting, had been complicit. He'd authorized payments to a shell company registered under a false address, supposedly for security improvements and property value enhancement. The company didn't exist, but the bank account did. Transfers showed regular deposits in round numbers, always a red flag, and withdrawals that matched purchases on Zelda and Roy's personal credit cards. One withdrawal covered new furniture purchased during a supposed HOA office upgrade. Another matched a payment to a luxury cabin rental in the Smokies. Right down to the date, Zelda had claimed she was out of town for a conference. "I cross-checked everything," Zara said. "This isn't just mismanagement. This is embezzlement. Over $87,000 over the last 3 years. Blake paled. "That's federal territory. It is now." Zara had already handed the documents to the district attorney's office. Within 48 hours, federal agents were involved. The HOA's bank account had been frozen since the initial investigation, but this new evidence triggered a full seizure. The Department of Justice filed charges: fraud, wire transfer manipulation, and misuse of nonprofit funds. The case had officially escalated beyond county jurisdiction. The community had been reeling from the first wave of revelations. This second wave turned heads and hardened resolve. No one had expected Zelda's obsessive control to be masking full-fledged white-collar crime. The fines, the citations, the endless threats, it had all been the cover for something far more deliberate. Every bogus complaint, every arbitrary rule, it was about creating a paper trail that justified the spending. The fake parking enforcement initiative, the neighborhood security patrol, the beautification task force. All lines on a budget, all funnels into the same account. The mayor's liaison to neighborhood associations, a woman named Ree with a no-nonsense voice and a background in forensic accounting, called an emergency oversight session. It wasn't held in the community center. It was held in the county courthouse. I stood before a panel of 5 city officials, including Ree, the deputy attorney general, and 2 members of the city's Department of Neighborhood Compliance. Zara sat beside me. I was sworn in, and for 2 hours I went through every detail I'd documented, starting from the night of the power shutdown to the last piece of evidence Blake had supplied about the padded invoices. I spoke clearly, with dates and names. I had nothing to exaggerate. The facts were more than enough. When I finished, Ree looked up from her notes. Mr. Franklin, given your meticulous records and the leadership you've shown, we'd like your help drafting a model charter for community associations across the county, something to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. I blinked. You want me to help write HOA policy? You've experienced the worst of it, she said. And you're standing here with evidence, not just complaints. That makes you exactly the kind of person we want guiding reform. I didn't answer right away. I glanced at Zara, who gave a single subtle nod. All right, I said. Let's do it. Back in the neighborhood, the news spread fast. Zelda and Roy had both been indicted. The court denied bail on the grounds of flight risk. Turns out they'd been making inquiries about properties in Belize. Martin, the former treasurer, had struck a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. He'd already turned over emails and archived meeting recordings, some of which showed board members laughing about creative accounting. The damage couldn't be undone overnight, but the healing started quickly. The community voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, not restructure it, not reform it, erase it. The oversight committee shifted into a voluntary neighborhood council, focused solely on information sharing and organizing events. No fines, no dues, no authority beyond what people gave it voluntarily. I declined to chair it, but agreed to serve as a liaison with the city for infrastructure issues. We didn't need a president anymore. We needed neighbors. The old HOA office was cleaned out and repurposed, converted into a free community resource center, with a lending library, a tool exchange wall, and a bulletin board for local events. The heavy filing cabinet, where Zelda had kept her compliance logs, was torn out and replaced with a coffee bar. One morning I found Curtis standing at the bar, sipping black coffee and shaking his head at the newly painted walls. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. "Feels like we broke a curse." "You did," I replied. "Took a while, but you did," he grinned. "You ever gonna run for city council?" "God, no. Shame. You'd clean house." I laughed and poured myself a cup. Blake, now fully cleared of wrongdoing, was busy organizing a neighborhood repair day, volunteers helping fix up homes that had been neglected due to years of HOA obstruction. Lydia had started a weekend workshop series on homeowner rights, teaching people how to read zoning codes and permitting laws. The elderly couple who'd once been threatened over their driveway brought cookies to every meeting. Zara and I grew closer not just through the fight, but through what came after. The quiet moments, the slow rebuilding, the shared belief that justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about empowering the honest. One rainy evening, months after the scandal had finally run its course, we sat on the porch again, watching the trees sway and listening to the soft patter of water on the roof. "You think she ever thought she'd get caught?" I asked. Zara leaned back in her chair. "People like Zelda don't think about getting caught. They think about staying in control. The moment they lose that, everything unravels. She almost got away with it. But she didn't. Because you installed a camera, because you invited the right guests. Because you didn't let it slide. I watched the rain hit the limestone path I'd built last summer with leftover bricks from the torn-down HOA sign. Every step forward had felt like lifting a weight. I didn't do it alone. You didn't have to. That's the point. The next week, I submitted the first draft of the model HOA reform policy to RE. It included mandatory transparency clauses, financial oversight requirements, and strict limits on enforcement powers. It also required that any power to issue fines be reviewed by municipal legal counsel before becoming enforceable. It passed unanimously. Other neighborhoods started adopting it. Some dissolved their HOAs. Others overhauled them entirely. In time, the very name Zelda and Wright became a cautionary tale in county workshops. Don't be a Zelda. Don't build a kingdom on fear, build a community on trust. The neighborhood changed. So did I. I stopped seeing the cabin as just a retreat from the world. It had become something else, a reminder that even in the middle of the woods, power could be abused, and justice could find its way between the trees. And best of all, the lights never went out again.